might be concerned if this AI revolution is only gonna widen the gap between the rich and the poor.
How would you feel, Cindy, if it did widen the gap between rich and poor, but also made the poor a lot richer?
I think it depends on your definition of the situation and also the time frame. People already with a lot of resources, they can invest a lot of capital in AI and leverage what they already have, whereas the poor lose jobs and they don't have any advantages.
The reason why I asked the original question is that it seems to me to be a different situation than a widening gap between rich and poor, where the people who have advantages, they can leverage that advantages. That seems like a good thing. We want people to be richer. And the problem that we want to prevent is actually we don't want the poor to become poorer. We want the poor to become more rich. And I do think that is a real risk we want to mitigate against AI. But yeah, I'm just always kind of sensitive to this idea that the gap between the rich and poor is the thing that we want to optimize against, because there are many ways to close that gap. And one time-tested way that we have historically tried to close that gap is by just making everyone poorer. And that seems to be morally bad and has led to some bad outcomes.
I'm glad that I mentioned Industrial Revolution because people want it. Now, my question would be, how can we mitigate the problem to prevent the poor being more poor in an AI revolution? What are the practical short-term solutions?
I guess I'm not yet entirely convinced that the poor getting poorer is even an inevitable short-term consequence of an AGI revolution scenario. It could very well be the case, for example, that because AGI exists, the basic goods that have utility, things like food and education, will become abundant and free in the same way that plastic bags or a chair is made extremely affordable through mass production and IKEA. And so in that world, the poor may actually become richer immediately. The other factor here is that which jobs actually gets displaced first, right? And if you were to rewind, say, 10, 20 years ago, no one would have probably guessed that the first jobs that are at risk are going to be artists and engineers, right? Like for applied AI, those are the two things that we have copilots to increase the productivity of engineers and generate art for us. That would not have been your guess. Your guess would have probably been a truck driver, for example, or a factory worker. But if you look at the way it's evolving, probably one of the last jobs to go is going to be a plumber. Traditional manual labor type of jobs that are not knowledge jobs, which are today highly paid. So the way the AI revolution might play out, it might be quite the reverse. And so I'm not sure that it's a given quite yet. But if it were, I think the way AI will reduce the cost of basic goods is the way in which the poor is unlikely to become poor.
If I have to play the bad person and dig deeper, I would say the artists and engineers, or especially artists, they're not necessarily the rich. For the context, my audience, a lot of them are artists or people who work in the office, but not necessarily have advantages. So it would be really helpful if they could have some advice too.
I think two things. One is, I personally believe that a lot of the reasons why people are worried about poverty in the AGI world, in a good case outcome that I'm optimistic about, will no longer exist, right? When we're afraid of poverty, what we're afraid of is not being able to eat, not being able to afford a good education, not being able to afford to have kids, sort of not being able to afford healthcare, the basic necessities of life. Those are likely to become abundantly available for basically free. What does money and being rich mean in the AGI world, and how do you become rich? Where the sort of productive utility becomes freely available and automated. And my personal belief is that the things that become valuable in that world are the equivalent of luxury goods. And so, if you imagine we live in a world where you could go to an equivalent McDonald's and it costs like 25 cents. And for the 25 cents, you can get a meal as pleasurable, as high quality as a meal that you get at French Laundry. What do humans do? And what is valuable? I think the things that become valuable are the things that are created by human beings that serve as luxury goods, that serve as a way of signaling status. So things like a provably home-cooked meal by a chef, or a piece of writing that is provably not written by AI or with any AI assistance, or a painting, or a handmade crafted bag, the equivalent of a Birkin bag. So things that other people desire in order to be able to better status signal are going to be things that are valuable. And that's what I think artists, or really any other kind of person, should focus on. What can you build in this new AGI world that help people invent and play new status games, is my personal belief.
Basically, we will be living in a better world where AIs work for us, assuming no AI takeover.
For those who are watching this video, do you think AI will lead to even worse wealth inequality? Leave your comment below.